Max continues the war against the FIA. More details regarding Daniel's contract have been revealed, and McLaren's genius upgrade strategy could help them win the titles. Do consider subscribing to the channel. Now let's get straight into the latest F1 news. Former McLaren F1 driver Mark Blundell has urged Christian Horner to orchestrate a rebuild of the Red Bull team in light of Adrian Newey's move to Aston Martin. Red Bull produced the most dominant season in F1 history last year, winning 21 of a possible 22 races as Max Verstappen eased to a third consecutive world championship. The Milton Keynes-based team entered the F1 2024 campaign as overwhelming favorites, but have struggled increasingly as the season has developed. Red Bull lost the lead of the Constructors' Championship for the first time since May 2022 last month, with McLaren holding a 41-point lead with 6 races remaining. Verstappen, meanwhile, has seen his advantage over Lando Norris reduced to 52 points, with the 27-year-old without a win since the Spanish Grand Prix in June 23rd, an 8-race streak, his longest barren run since the 2020 season. Red Bull have been rocked by a number of high-profile departures this year, with Newey, the most decorated individual in the sport's history, announcing last month that he will join Aston Martin in F1 2025. Newey's exit, announced in May, has been followed by the departures of long-serving sporting director Jonathan Wheatley and strategy chief Will Courtney, who will take up key positions at Audi F1 and McLaren respectively. Blundell made 61 F1 starts for the likes of Brabham, Ligier, Tyrrell, and McLaren in the early 1990s, registering a total of 3 podium finishes. And the former UK F1 pundit has urged Horner, the longest-serving active team principal having been appointed in 2005, to oversee a complete rebuild of Red Bull, including identifying the next Adrian Newey. Blundell pointed to McLaren's resurgence, having been reduced to backmarker status less than a decade ago during their disastrous partnership with Red Bull's current engine suppliers Honda, as evidence of a top team rising again. He told The Express, "I think it's time for Christian Horner to use all of his ability and his depth of knowledge now to put together a Grand Prix winning team again, and so much of that is personnel-led. So it's got to be, who is the next Adrian Newey? Who's going to replace Newey in those years to come to design Grand Prix winning cars and be a consistent guy or girl to put that on pen to paper? I think it's always difficult when the teams get on the downward cycle, but a lot of it is cyclical, and we've seen that. And it's no different to watching McLaren now coming up on the upward trajectory. That's something that we haven't seen for many seasons and many years, but it takes time to get everything put in place. I don't think it'd be an overnight change with Red Bull to get back to the heady days that they've expected and believe that should be there all the time, but it's achievable." Red Bull technical director Pierre Wache has been described as Newey's in-house successor, with the Frenchman believed to have led the development of the current RB20 car. In an exclusive interview with PlanetF1.com at July's Belgian Grand Prix, Wache described Newey's departure as a shame, but outlined his optimism that Red Bull are well-placed to succeed without the F1 design guru. He said, "It's a challenge in the company, and it's a shame that he's leaving, but at one point we move forward. As an engineering team, what you see from outside is one aspect, but on our side, we already know. When people leave the team, we have already organized ourselves with our team. We would prefer him with us, but that is not how it is. We don't think in this way. We try to see what you can do for yourself and how you can improve. If we see some weaknesses, we try to improve, and this is how we work. We concentrate on what we can do better." Asked if a new chapter is beginning at Red Bull, Wache stressed the importance of promoting within to keep a supply of fresh talent as established figures move on. He said, "For sure, but it's not new. Before, we had Peter Prodromou, who left after 2014. Mark Ellis left after 2013. It's the nature of the team and the leaders who left. They were a leader in their area. But it's a natural aspect of each organization. For sure, Adrian was a big figure of the system. But at one point, we give a chance to the younger, bright people to embrace this challenge, like I have now. Some people like Enrico Balbo, head of Aero, Ben Waterhouse, head of performance engineering, Craig Skinner, chief designer, Paul Monahan, chief engineer. It is good for the people and for the team. It's a massive benefit because you see the hard work is paying off. The team is a working organization, not by individual, but a group and how we work together. If you have each individual working in isolation, nothing works. If you want to put a rocket on the moon, one guy cannot do it. You need people doing stuff, and it's the same for the car. Daniel Ricciardo admitted in Singapore that his fairy tale ending of a return to Red Bull wasn't going to happen. Sky F1 pundit Anthony Davidson says Daniel Ricciardo seemed to be on a race-by-race contract with Red Bull VCARB at times due to the constant uncertainty surrounding his future. Ricciardo was dropped by VCARB last week, with Liam Lawson stepping up to partner Yuki Tsunoda for the final 6 races of the F1 2024 season. The announcement came after Ricciardo bid F1 farewell at the Singapore Grand Prix, where he competed amid mounting speculation surrounding his future and was treated to a guard of honor after the race. Ricciardo enjoyed the most successful period of his F1 career with Red Bull's senior team between 2014 and 2018, claiming all but one of his 8 career victories, before spells with Renault and McLaren. The Australian returned to Red Bull as the team's reserve driver at the end of 2022 after being dropped by McLaren before embarking upon a comeback with VCARB, then AlphaTauri, in July 2023. Despite openly targeting a return to the senior team, Ricciardo largely disappointed upon his return, scoring points just 4 times in 26 appearances. Appearing on the Sky F1 podcast, former Bar Honda and Super Aguri driver Davidson admitted Ricciardo's exit came as no surprise after the sheer amount of speculation in Singapore. And he claimed Ricciardo could have been dropped even sooner, with his position at VCARB shaky ever since his mid-2023 comeback. Red Bull team principal Christian Horner revealed earlier this week that advisor Helmut Marko was keen to drop Ricciardo around the time of the Spanish Grand Prix in June, a weekend the driver competed with a handwritten note, "Not without a fight," on the rear of his helmet. He said, "I wasn't surprised to see the news break and for it to become official, because it wasn't like we were just second-guessing out there in Singapore." Even before that race, people do talk behind closed doors, and it's our responsibility as pundits, as journalists, to respect the privacy of drivers, of athletes, of team bosses. So it's not like we were taking wild guesses to come up with this hypothesis. We did actually know, but you're sworn to secrecy sometimes in the paddock, and just because you don't say it's official doesn't mean that it's a guess. So it was way more than just an educated guess, definitely, and not surprised to see the news break at all. I wouldn't have been surprised if it happened any earlier either, for that matter, not that was spoken about in the paddock. It was just the feeling you had with Daniel during his second time at Red Bull, albeit with the junior team. It almost seemed like he was on a race-by-race deal in many ways. If you're not performing, then your chance of moving up to the A-team diminishes, even to the point where we have to replace you with one of our younger drivers in our roster. It's just the way that Red Bull has always operated, so I'm not really surprised that it's come to this, and I think Daniel can walk away now, knowing that he gave it his all. He did have that second chance. So many drivers don't get that opportunity. And I think he can walk away with no hard feelings now, and also know that he did the best that he could, and was very lucky to be given that second opportunity. Davidson's fellow pundit, the presenter Rachel Brooks, expressed her frustration that Ricciardo had been denied a fitting farewell in Singapore, as he was left to field questions about his future with no official announcement made by Red Bull. She said, "I want to caveat everything by saying I think Liam Lawson was super impressive last year, so him getting the chance I think is right." However, to see everyone talking about him as though his career was over and he was leaving, without it being officially announced, just left a bit of a bad taste, to be honest, because it just didn't feel like he got the send-off he deserved. And I know this is the way Red Bull do things. Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, Nyck de Vries, none of them knew it was their last race and didn't get a send-off for their last race, even if they knew. So I know that's how they do things. But everyone's talking about him leaving, but no one's actually saying it. It just didn't feel very nice. It didn't feel the right way to treat somebody, and especially somebody who's done what he has in the sport. I think there's a stat that only 5% of drivers have achieved as much as him in the sport, from all the drivers that have raced, so it just didn't feel like the right send-off to me, the way it was done. Christian Horner says Helmut Marko wanted Daniel out from Spain, so he was racing under that kind of pressure from Spain onwards, trying to prove himself. It's a ruthless sport, but wow, it just didn't feel very nice. It didn't feel like the way we want to treat people in our sport. PlanetF1.com revealed last week that Ricciardo has been offered the chance to maintain ties with Red Bull via an ambassador-style role, with Horner confirming the team have made their intentions very clear to keep him on board in some capacity. Marko added that Red Bull are hoping to exploit Ricciardo's popularity, particularly in the United States, but revealed that he expects the Australian to retire from racing for good now he has left F1. Asked if Ricciardo could compete in a different category of motorsport, he said, "I don't think so." And if he no longer drives actively, does he even want these PR activities? Ricciardo has exited F1 with an overall record of 8 Grand Prix victories, 32 podiums, 3 pole positions, and 17 fastest laps from 257 starts. Max Verstappen has said he has no issues continuing to host his own media scrums rather than being unable to be himself in FIA press conferences. Verstappen drew the ire of the governing body at the Singapore Grand Prix as he was given a punishment for using the F word in the Thursday FIA press conference, resulting in the Dutch driver refusing to engage in the following press conferences he was required to attend for finishing in the top 3. Verstappen was ordered to carry out work in the public service after using the expletive, resulting in many of his fellow drivers poking fun at the situation as they kept referring to being aware of what language they used while speaking publicly. His punishment will likely be to take part in something related to an educational purpose, such as when his team boss Christian Horner took part in the annual training meeting for race stewards in 2022. The Red Bull driver, instead of answering questions properly in the FIA press conferences, where he made a point of explaining his reticence was not aimed at host Tom Clarkson, instead hosted his own media sessions after qualifying and the race. Finishing second at Marina Bay, Verstappen spoke out about how he felt irked by the decision taken by the FIA to punish him for his use of language. "I think it's just the wording, the ruling that the sport is heading into. For me personally, with these kind of things, I know, of course, you can't insult people. That's quite straightforward, and I think no one really wants to do that," he said. "But, yeah, it's all a bit too soft. Really, honestly, it's silly. It's super silly what we're dealing with." Such restrictions being placed upon the drivers rob personalities of being authentic, Verstappen said, explaining, "If you can't really be yourself to the fullest, then it's better not to speak. At the end of the day, that's what no one wants because then you become a robot, and that's not how you should be going about it in the sport." Reigning F1 world champion also revealed he had written the steward's ruling with his punishment to the Grand Prix Drivers Association, where it had met with mirth. "I wrote in the GPDA the ruling," he said. "Everyone was almost laughing, like, what the hell is that, basically? It is very, very silly." Verstappen didn't rule out the possibility of continuing to maintain this stance for the rest of the season, showing up to the press conferences to fulfill his FIA obligations before engaging more properly with the media via his own sessions. "I don't know. I don't mind doing this, media scrum. For me, it works well," he said. "I think you should be able to show emotions in a way. That's what racing is about, any sport. I mean, everyone walking around on a pitch, if they get tackled or get pushed or they're not happy with something, a frustrating moment or something that they get asked about, I think it's quite normal that there can be a sort of reaction." Verstappen also said he couldn't say how he sees the situation being resolved. "All these latest additions, I don't want to go too much into detail because otherwise I might get called back up again." Verstappen, who is under contract with Red Bull until the end of F1 2028, has long made it clear that he is in the sport for his own personal enjoyment of racing, and, having been annoyed to have been hauled up over what he viewed as a trivial matter, confirmed such antics would have a bearing on whether he'll stick around. "These kinds of things definitely decide my future as well, when you can't be yourself, or you have to deal with these kinds of silly things," he said. "I think now, I'm at the stage of my career that you don't want to be dealing with this all the time. It's really tiring, Of course, it's great to have success and win races, but once you have accomplished all that, winning championships and races, and then you want to just have a good time as well. Of course, everyone is pushing to the limit, everyone in this battle, even at the back of the grid. But if you have to deal with all these kind of silly things, for me, that is not a way of continuing in the sport. That's for sure." Verstappen even had some support from Lewis Hamilton over the matter, with the British driver saying he hoped Verstappen would ignore the FIA ruling. "I think it's a bit of a joke, to be honest," said Hamilton. "This is the pinnacle of the sport. Mistakes are made. I certainly wouldn't be doing it serving the punishment, and I hope Max doesn't do it. Formula One teams readily know that if they are not bringing constant upgrades to their cars, then that is a surefire way to drift down the order. But one of the quirks of the 2024 season is that McLaren's march to the front of the grid, an emergence of the MCL38 as arguably F1's quickest car over recent months, has come from it taking a bit of a different approach compared to its competitors. While rivals have been eagerly chasing downforce gains through the campaign with a multitude of new floors, the area of the car where there is the most performance to be had, McLaren has stood out from the crowd. It has deliberately stuck with the same floor design that it first unleashed at the Miami Grand Prix. Its focus instead has been on bringing a series of more minor tweaks to other areas of the car, which includes front and rear wings, beam wings, brake ducts, bodywork, and suspension elements. In taking this route, McLaren may be sacrificing potential downforce gains that a new floor could deliver, but the benefits are that it can hit the ground running each weekend with a package that it both well knows and is one that the drivers feel confident with. And the more the opposition has struggled to get new floors to work properly, with race winners Ferrari, Red Bull, and Mercedes all hitting trouble at various points, the more McLaren's approach seems to have been the best one. As RB team boss Laurent Mekies explained about his team's plight this year, it is in chasing gains that outfits have struggled. "We started slow in the season," he said. "We knew we had not done enough in the winter, and then we started to pick some low-hanging fruits in car development and managed to bolt on performance into the car. Then, in our development path, in trying to bring more downforce to the car, we made the car slower, which is something that does not happen very often. But it's probably linked to the very last years of these regulations, where everything's already so optimized that it's quite easy to break something when you think you are adding load in one part of the map." With the phenomenon of floor upgrades not delivering the gains hoped for up and down the grid, it is no wonder that rivals are now pondering if McLaren's approach of sticking with what you know is actually better. Aston Martin team boss Mike Krack admitted recently that his squad knows it would be foolish not to evaluate if changing tact on the upgrade program is actually better. "We are looking at this a lot," said Krack. "If you compare the pace and you see when have they, McLaren, made a step, and you can correlate that with some upgrades that are declared as we never have the full picture, there is some correlations where you can say, okay, this is what it has been changed, and what has it potentially done. When you see, for example, the Zandvoort upgrade, it's a bit here, a bit there. You see how fine and complex these cars have become, so I think it would be foolish not to look at it." There is, however, some debate about whether McLaren's floor approach is actually a magic bullet at all. First of all, while McLaren says it is running the same floor as it had in Miami, that does not mean it has not made tweaks to improve it. A quick scan through F1's upgrade submissions shows that while the floor itself is unchanged, tweaks have been made to the floor edges, so it is not identical to what it was in May. If, as team boss Andrea Stella has frequently said, F1 success now is about the game of millimeters, then fine-tuning what it already had would be a good route to delivering more performance without a major overhaul. There's also no way that rivals are able to properly understand if the underside being run now is the same as what McLaren had in Miami or has been modified in any way. F1's rules that demand teams reveal their upgrades only count for specific big parts, so tweaking the fins underneath would never be revealed. Article 19.1c of F1's sporting regulations states, "Each competitor must provide a summary document to the media delegate listing the name and brief description of all major aerodynamic and bodywork components and assemblies that have not been run at a previous competition or TCC, testing of current cars." There is also another element to McLaren's upgrade plan. It has had the luxury of being one of the fastest out there. When you are at the front of the pack, and especially in a scenario where your opposition has made some missteps with upgrades that did not work, there is nowhere near the feeling of outside pressure to make a change as if you are falling back. So in essence, it almost becomes a virtuous circle that if the approach of sticking to what you know works is best, then the advantage is locked in because others, in stumbling as they seek gains, never catch up. McLaren chief designer Rob Marshall explained recently that being more considered with what it was doing and what it was changing on its car had been a significant benefit. And that also allowed it the breathing room to ensure that when big changes do come, they actually bring the performance expected. It's nice to be delivering lots of little upgrades all the time, but equally, sometimes you just have to hold on a little bit while you wait for a chunk of bits to come all at the same time, he said. The advantage in doing that is that often bits don't combine very well, or not as well as you think they would. And if you deliver them in one lump, then that sort of combination of parts has been in CFD together. It was developed together. It's been through the wind tunnel together, so you can be more confident with that combination of bits works well together. Whereas if you do it bit by bit, you might introduce an upgrade on one part and then work on another part and find out actually it's a bit compromised by the previous change you made. That is it for this video. I'll see you around.